All right, we are back with the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with my part-time co-host for this season, again, Mitch Salazar. And wow, we will do our best not to make this a 4-hour episode, but since our preseason episode, there's been quite a lot of news. We had an amazing finish to the Lexus Pipe Pro presented by Yeti and won by Katie Simmers and Baron Mamiya. Congrats to both of them, and we'll certainly talk more about that later. And then yesterday, reigning two-time world champion Felipe Toledo announced that he is withdrawing from the remainder of the 2024 Championship Tour season, citing mental health reasons. This, of course, came days after his withdrawal from the opening CT stop of the season, in which he cited an illness before his elimination round heat. In a huge week of surfing news, Toledo's announcement is certainly the most recent, and I think it's probably worth it for you and I, Mitch, to talk about it first. Mitch, what were your thoughts about both Felipe's withdrawal from the event and then a few days later learning about his withdrawal from the entire CT season?
Well, starting with the withdrawal from the event, a 1.77 heat total doesn't look good for the reigning and defending world champion, Dave, going up against Samuel Pupo, who had a couple great scores, and then local wildcard Shion Crawford, who we all know is great out there at both Pipeline and Sunset Beach. Realistically, not the result that he was looking for, obviously. He withdraws from the elimination round, doesn't even compete, and while we were doing the broadcast, we got a text in our group saying, hey, elimination round heat 1 isn't going out, so we're starting with heat 2. I didn't send a message back asking why, and then around half an hour later, we got the update that Felipe withdrew due to an illness. And, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in this one. I was actually writing up a few days after that I think all answers will be defined in Tahiti. We won't be seeing him at the CT event in Tahiti, though, but just going off of his past results at Pipe, Dave, has a couple of quarterfinal finishes. One was last year in 2023, given it was way smaller, rippable, not necessarily conditions that you're going to see at Pipe most of the time, and especially thrive in for Felipe. And then in 2014, he also had a 5th place finish. Wasn't big either, but was able to make it into finals day. But he's averaging a 17th place finish right there for somebody who was a 2-time world champion. I'd have to say, Dave, out of the last 4 or 5 world champions that we have on the men's side, has to be the lowest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and same as you. Like, I obviously wasn't in that camp. I'm not on the ground, but interestingly enough, and I mentioned this in the intro to last week's episode with Leonardo Fioravante, who was just talking about Pipeline in general, wasn't referencing the withdrawal or anything like that, but he was just like, look, it is the most dangerous wave on the planet. And I actually think in the last few months, it's really lived up to that kind of ominous title. Like, there's been so many injuries. There's been so many high-profile surfers who have been hurt. And Leo said, look, like, if any one thing, your equipment, your body, your mental state, a stomach illness, whatever, if anything is off and you're going out to surf serious pipe, it has potentially very serious ramifications. You could die. You could end your career. And I think, if Felipe felt ill that morning, I'm sure he was aware of the public narrative out there. And I'm sure in his head, because he's so talented, he's probably hoping, look, if I can go out there, I can survive the opening round heat. If I get first or second, and then I'll have a few days to recover. And when that didn't happen, you mentioned, he put up a 1.77 in his opening round heat. He probably just went, look, I'm physically not in a position to do this in the elimination round. And it's tough. And I think it's tough for him because he absolutely has the talent to do well pretty much anywhere. But there are just a few spots where that hasn't happened yet. Few days later, we get the news that he's pulling out for the remainder of the year. This was on Sunday. Mitch, what were you thinking when you got that news, and how does it relate to the pipe withdrawal?
Pretty damn big shock, Dave. I'm not going to lie. It came out of the blue for me. It's been a few years since I knew Carissa was going to take a step back. She's kind of wanted to do some other things outside of professional surfing, especially since she's been doing it since she was in her late teens here at the CT level. Stephanie Gilmore kind of came to a surprise too. I didn't know she was going to take some time off, but I guess it's the right time to do it, especially since she didn't qualify for the Australian team for the Olympics. This one, though, two-time world champion, especially with the final still being at lowers. I think it was a golden opportunity for Felipe to at least try to get a three-peat going. The first person to do it since Sandy Irons in 02, 03, and 04 it would have been. But I think most importantly, just mentioning that he didn't do well at Pipeline, at least getting some redemption throughout the rest of the season too. Out of the last 5 world champions on the men's side, De Souza, John, Italo, and Gabe, including Felipe right there too, all 4 of the other guys have won at Pipeline and have done well in Tahiti. So not to say that he's not capable of doing so, especially with the Olympics coming up and him qualifying for that. He didn't really announce whether or not he's going to compete there or not. I would think that he is, but most importantly, what it does for your legacy. So when you're being compared to the all-time greats, Andy, Kelly, Mark Akalupa, who only won 1 world championship, but we all know what he did for professional surfing just overall, Derek Ho, Tom Carroll, where do you compare it to all these guys now, given that you're probably competing in the highest level of surfing we've ever seen on the CT, but most importantly, given the format and that he's been a higher seed every single time that we've had the finals at lowers, how does this impact it? And I just feel like if you're not doing well at those 2 locations, there's no real comparison to those people that have come before you, especially including Andy and Kelly, which I think are probably the 2 most complete surfers of all time, even including John and Gabe in that conversation too, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the mental health thing is legitimate. I think you see it across all high-level sports and high-pressure situations. And, you mentioned Carissa, you mentioned Steph. Those are both surfers that were on tour for well over 10 years. Carissa for 13, Steph for probably 15 or more. And, surfing, it kind of has that Overton window shifted a little bit because of Kelly, where Kelly's been on tour for 35 years. That's probably not a fair benchmark for elite level talent like a Carissa or a Steph or a Felipe. Like, I'd argue that if we have them on tour for more than a decade, we're all laughing as fans because that's such a great thing to experience. And with regards to Felipe, he's been on tour for 10 years. His rookie season was 2013. And he was dynamic out the gates, but then over the last, 5 years, 2019, he finishes 4th. 2021, he finishes 2nd. He wins it in 2022. He wins it in 2023. He is, the last 5 years of a 10-year career amongst the world's best, been the target and been in the limelight. And, as a former competitor yourself, Mitch, can you talk to us just a little bit about just the pressures of competing? Because I think a lot of us, myself included, on one half of our brains are going, oh my God, someone's paying you to surf. Like, I have to work a desk job and it's got its own pressure and it's not as glamorous and it's not as fun. You have this amazing lifestyle, but that lifestyle comes with its own set of unique pressure as well. And whether it was your own competitive background, Mitch, or just having been in the trenches and seeing these world title contenders do their thing, it's taxing, right?
Fully is, Dave. And I'm glad that you bring that up because everybody thinks that it's just sunshine and rainbows the entire time when you're doing this. And yeah, you get paid to do something that you love for a living, but in the end, as a competitor, it's just a lot of strain on both your body, physically and mentally. And, I respect his decision. I think it's, something that only him and his close family and friends are truly going to understand. And in the end, just got to respect it because he's the only person that truly knows what he's going through. But most importantly, if he feels like he's done enough to be able to take this time off, then go ahead and do it. You can silence everybody afterwards or just live with it. I mean, in the end, people are always going to critique. And Jake Howard from Surfer Magazine actually wrote something great the other day. There's times where a lot of fans put their world champions down. And I think this could potentially be one of those cases. Not to say that you're not supposed to be critical of these people that are considered the best in the world. But in the end, the guy's still a human being, right? And as an athlete, he still wants to be revered as somebody that people look up to. So if he feels like he has to take a step back in order for him to be the best version of himself for people who look up to him, I think that's something truly honorable. But one thing that I will say, in 2011, I competed for the Mexican team at ISA World Juniors. He won the U16s. 2 months later, gets signed by Nike, comes to the US Open, gets the wild card, destroys everybody in the final over there. You mentioned, John, Connor Coffin, Evan Geiselman, all those guys being in the final with him. He blew them out of the water. Qualifies next year for the CT and has been on the championship tour for 10 years now, been a contender for legitimately 5 or 6. So, you can even call it a career right there if you want. Not to say that he's going to do it, but I just think when it comes to strain, and especially being in the limelight in Brazil, which is a market that has opened up a lot more, there's probably a lot of pressure on him from that beautiful South American country, something that we don't see as much here in North America, Dave.
It's fair. And it's a story that I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot more about in the coming months. Felipe, as you've said, is an incredible surfer. He's sort of paradigm shifting in so many ways. We certainly wish him the best in his time off and hope we get to see him again soon. And while the Toledo news was big, it did come on the heels of one of the most exciting final days of event competition we've ever seen. So, Mitch, let's get to winners and losers from the Lexus Pipe Pro presented by Yeti. Who have you got first?
So I feel like we should go losers first, and this is kind of a big one, Dave. The Brazilian Storm, to me. First time since 2016 that they haven't made the quarterfinals at a CT event on the men's side. Pablo Zanoki from Duke Surf first reported that it's not only that first time, but also a major off event for them, as Iago Dora, a former top 10 in the world, was their best result at this one, 9th place. But most importantly, how about the poor result from Gabe, too? I mean, he loses out in the round of 32, but he posts up a small heat total, Dave. We're talking about a 2.73 heat total against Crosby Colapinto, a rookie on tour, where Gabe's averaging close to a 5th place finish at Pipeline. Some place he's made the final multiple times before and he's won. Pretty surprised that they haven't done so well there. And I think it was just a wake-up call for them, given all the rookies and all the new young stars that we're seeing on the CT.
That's a great point. And obviously, we're going to get to it a little bit too. Conditions, not the easiest forecast we've ever dealt with. So that probably, played a factor into some of that. Yep. But I think it's a great call. And I think that we have seen the rise of the Brazilian Storm over the last decade, right? Gabriel won his first world title in 2014. Adriano backed it up in 2015. And they have really been dominant on the men's side for a decade, pretty much. But in the last few years, you have seen these inroads being made from young Australians, young Hawaiians, young Californians, folks from all over the world that are eating away at that dominance. And so I think that's a great one. It's one to keep an eye on for sure in 2024. My first loser that I've identified for this event is actually, Carissa Moore fans, myself included. Before the season started, but inconveniently after you and I had our first preseason episode, Carissa announced that she'd be stepping away from full-time CT competition after the Lexus Pipe Pro. We've already touched on it. 13 years on tour. We're so fortunate that we got to experience what she did for that amount of time. 5 world titles, dozens of CT wins. And it could have been very quick. Like, it could have been 3 to 5 years, and that was her window, and that was great. But we had 13, and I think it's great. And I wish her all the best in what she does next. That said, going down the way she did at Pipe, probably not how anyone wanted to see it happen, myself included, certainly herself included. But that is competition, and that's what happens. And she had an opportunity at the end of her elimination round heat. Didn't work out for her. But on the Carissa stuff, too, just to end on a brighter spot, and I want to get your take on this, too. Just as a surf fan, I've always found Carissa to be so much better a surfer than a competitor. And that's not to knock her as a competitor. It just always felt like she was so much freer without the pressure of the singlet. And when you watch her free surf, or occasionally, there's brilliance, certainly in competition for sure. But when you watch her free surf, it is truly, truly special. And I bring that up because she is so accomplished in competition, right? 5 world titles, dozens of CT wins. And I think that actually speaks even more to how talented she is, because I don't know if she was ever fully comfortable in it. And we've seen it, in the finals format. I think you could argue we probably saw it at Pipe. She didn't seem super confident or comfortable in either heat. And there was a ton of pressure on her because this was her last event. But yeah, my first loser is the Carissa Moore fans, because that was the last outing we got to see in competition for her, for now anyway. But I guess the positive is hopefully we'll see her in another exciting project outside the Jersey soon.
Yeah, and we're going to see her in Tahiti too. I think it's a good event for her. But I agree. I think she's always been a better surfer just in general than she has been a competitor. Like if you look at Steph's career, especially in 2022 when she came, I mean, she was dude, number 5 in the world and she came back to win the world championship against Carissa at lowers, and she surfed a tremendous amount of heats that day. I think it's just a testament to her willpower. For Carissa, I think the event that always stands out the most to me is the surf ranch because you have the pressure of being in a jersey, yeah, but really the key to success there is creativity, and
Right.
she just always brought it in on each and every wave, and it almost felt like she just took it as a free surfing session there, and I think that's why she was so successful. Wish her nothing but the best, and I think Tahiti's going to be good. She's looking for a second Olympic gold, and then after that, do whatever you want because you've earned it. And getting to my second loser, Dave, it's actually one of Carissa's biggest nemesis. It's Sally Fitzgibbons. She loses in the round of 16, a really close heat to Tati Weston Webb. But the reason why I put her up here is because she was leading the majority of the heat and let Tati back into it, given it's a format that a lot of these women haven't really used too much at Pipeline, the overlapping heat formats. It's really entertaining, but it can be difficult to manage both time and priority out there. It seemed like towards the end of the heat, she was losing grasp of where to sit, and Tati was just finding these waves underneath priority and got into a good rhythm and found 2 waves at the end. But the most important thing about Sally is that her confidence coming into 2024 was quite good, given that she fell off tour in the mid-year cut, had to requalify through the Challenger Series, and now is in a bad position heading into Sunset Beach after a poor result here at Pipeline.
It's a great one. And you know, Sally is a veteran of the sport. I actually think she's surfing better than ever. Like, I think her surfing's excellent. But you're right. Like, that's an uncharacteristic mistake for her to let something like that slip away. And I think we will continue to see her switched on. Sunset's an interesting opportunity because despite the chaos of the venue sometimes, I think it is a more cerebral venue where experience and tactics and strategy have more of a role to play, and that's somewhere where she could absolutely shine. But similar to my second loser in the sense of I'm going with the establishment generation at Pipeline. And what I mean by that is, you know, on the men's side, you had your established pipe hitters like Kelly Slater, Ryan Callanan, Jack Robinson, Iago Dora, Italo Ferreira, Kanoe Igarashi, Gabriel Medina, and Seth Moniz, all going down much earlier than you'd expect. And aside from arguably the establishment pipe surfer in John John, the men's quarterfinals included Australia's Connor O'Leary, who is always dangerous, Baron Mamiya, who's an emerging talent, more on him later, and Ian Gentile, you know, last year's Rookie of the Year, and in my personal opinion, a very dangerous man at virtually any venue. Point is, it wasn't the usual pipe suspects that dominated the pointy end of the draw. And on the women's side, we had, you know, the aforementioned Carissa Moore, Sally Fitzgibbons, Tyler Wright, Moana Jones-Wong, Tatiana Weston Webb, Caroline Marks, and Joanne DeFay all fell short before the semifinals, with Simmers, Picklum, Hennessy, and Sakura Johnson making up the final 4. You know, the surfing world was highlighting even before the season started that it does feel like a year where there is going to be a significant generational shift. And I think we're seeing it play out here at Pipe, and we'll see how it goes at Sunset.
For sure, that's a great call. And I especially think with the American Revolution that we saw last year on the Challenger Series and how well most of them did, besides Cole Houshman in this event, was something that truly stood out to me. But most importantly, the comfort level that we saw from a lot of them, too. I mean, dude, how was Cade Matson throwing himself over the ledge on that first day of competition? Like, few people would have done that in a jersey, and he truly went out there and tried to make the most of it. But you actually mentioned my third loser, Dave, and it's Jack Robinson. You know, number 5 in the world last year, defending event champion. Given how good the waves were on that day where they did compete in overlapping formats, I thought that he was going to post a couple excellent scores. Ends up losing to Ramsey Bukiam in a close heat. But I just think overall this was a golden opportunity for him to be able to move up into the top 10 at the beginning of the season. Given that Tahiti's earlier in the year too, he probably would have solidified his spot right there if he maintains himself within striking distance of world number 1 heading into places like Punta Roca and even Brazil. But now, with the addition of Fiji, I'm not as preoccupied for him. But you got to look at who's coming up behind the rankings, too, and how seeding's going to affect things. Because Gabe lost out early. We saw Felipe withdraw. So his seed's going to, be replaced by somebody else, too. John finished runner up here at this event. So a lot of moving pieces in the first event of the season, and Jack Robinson has a lot of catching up to do. An event where he's been successful before. He's won at Sunset Beach at the Challenger Series level and at the junior level. I feel like he's going to have a bounce back event here, Dave.
It's a great pick. It's not the result I don't think any of us expected from Jack. I think that, he's a new father, which is fantastic. And I think that he even looks better than he did last year. Free serves,
Yep.
Early rounds at pipe, like crazy uncanny relationship with pipe, and maybe Barron and John are the only other two in the draw that have that. But as you pointed out, like everyone in these draws is dangerous. And you have Ramsey Bukaim coming in as a replacement surfer, Moroccan. He is dangerous everywhere, and he showed that. It was a close heat and he took down Jack pretty early on. And I just think that's going to be the story of the year. There are no easy heats, but as you pointed out, for someone like Jack, he just seems really switched on and he seems like he's surfing better. He seems like he's in great headspace. I think we'll see a bounce back result at Sunset Beach for him. My final loser, and we'll likely get into it a bit more in the next segment, but the Sharp Eye men's team, who were so dominant in 2023, just ridiculously dominant on just the men's CT Shaper rankings. They didn't have a great showing at pipe. No one in the quarterfinals, no results on the men's side. And with the withdrawal of reigning two-time world champion Felipe Toledo from the season, I think it's going to be tough sledding for them this year. But, and we're going to get to this too, they had a huge showing from their women's team, which was virtually non-existent in 2023. So weird inversion there. I'm sure the men's team's going to bounce back, but they didn't have a great performance out at pipe. Yeah, switching to winners, Mitch, who you got for your first winner from the Lexus Pipe Pro presented by Yeti?
Well, first one's pretty easy. It's the surfers representing Hawaiian, and Barron Mamiya, John Florence making the final. Congratulations to both of them, especially to Barron. He gets his second CT win, Dave, and his first at Pipeline. Big stuff, especially dropping a 10 in the final against the Prince of Pipe. Pretty hard to do. Ian Gentile, Imai Kalani Deval, they both make finals day. Gentile gets a semifinal finish, matches his best result so far in the CT. Imai with a great result here, Dave. Quarterfinals, big start to the year for him, especially considering that he didn't make the mid-year cut a few seasons ago. And how about Betty Lou Sakura Johnson, too? Dude, I almost felt like she beat Molly Picklum in the semifinals. I know Molly had the 10, but Sakura had the one wave at the end that could have easily gone her way. But big performance by the local surfers. I felt that local knowledge truly prevailed, especially on finals day, Dave.
It's a great call. And I mean, the Hawaiian surfers, many of them young and upcoming. John's obviously been on tour for years at this point, but really impressive showing from them and a worthy winner. My first winner is just that women's class of Katie, Molly, and Betty. Obviously we could pick any of them. All three of them could be my 1, 2, 3 winners from the event. But collectively on the final day, it was shocking how well they were surfing. Very serious pipeline. Katie is a hugely deserving winner of the event. Molly and Betty were amazing. Betty had these insane backdoor waves. Molly was sending it on just huge backdoor sets, like the biggest waves of the day. I think Molly was bagging from backdoor and just late, steep, like on her toes, like making the bottom and just pulling up under the lip. And I'm like, oh my, that is a horrifying looking wave. Yeah. And like Molly sending it at pipe, her 10, I think is maybe the most critical wave ever ridden by a woman at Pipeline. With full respect to Moana Jones-Wong as well, but Molly's entry point on that wave, on her backhand, how she knifed the drop and set her rail beyond impressive. You wouldn't have thought there's any difference between men and women if you just pulled up and squinted and watched that wave. Like, it looked like an insane ride, agnostic of gender. And for Molly to do it at such a young age, she's been so good out there already. But it was paradigm shifting. And I think, the day started with some of the women previously having been untested in those conditions, and they answered the call. Katie winning the event and stating that pipe is for the girls is it's icon status. Like, it was a great day for those three. I think I'm still buzzing from how impressed I was.
Dude, well, that's actually leading up to my second winner, Dave, because I have, both Katie Simmers and Molly Picklum
Mm.
right here. But, big props to both of them. Same thing goes to Betty Lou. I felt like she did amazing on the last day. But most importantly, I think that might have been the best heat I've ever seen at Pipeline. Not only for, the women that competed there for many different occasions, but I just feel like overall that semifinal between Betty Lou and Molly Picklum is going to go down as one of the best surf heats ever. I mean,
Yeah.
how back and forth was it? The lead shifted quite a few times, and I think Molly just proved in this event, because Katie mentioned it during one of her post-heat interviews, Dave, with AJ, that it's so hard to decipher where to sit out there when there's not 150 people sitting in the lineup at the same time.
Right.
So for a lot of these young women that are coming up that don't surf there as regularly during free surfs, to be able to position yourself and have that kind of comfort in the lineup with 2, 3 people out at the most during a single time frame, I thought was the most impressive thing about it. Her comfort level, especially going right, was noticeable, but that 10-point ride to me might be one of the best waves I've ever seen in competitive surfing history. Now let's shift over to Katie Simmers, our champion.
Mm.
What she was able to do, just cruising through rounds, dropping excellent scores every single heat that she was surfing, but just kind of being that under the radar person, I felt was what gave her the confidence to be able to take out Molly in the final, because she was never riding a super high, but she was never low. She found a balance throughout the entire event. And just talking about her youth, 18 years of age, wins her first event at Pipe with only this being her second one surfed out there too.
Mm.
In her second season, when we're starting off 2024, this is the first event. She has 3 victories in a year and an event long, Dave.
It's a great call. Well, we're pretty aligned, I think, for this episode, because my next winner is one you mentioned already, but I've got Baron Mamiya. And not just for his win, but for the statement he made in doing so. He was on fire all event, especially on the final day. Just so comfortable, so dangerous. And to beat John Florence in waves like that in a final at Pipeline, it's a huge deal. And I think after he won, he said something about, bidding adieu to the imposter syndrome. And I think that's fair, as someone who found himself on tour, kind of stumbling into it through wildcard performance, the unusual circumstances a couple of years ago. He's a young guy. He's competing against his heroes, and it can be really difficult to feel like you belong. We've talked about it with so many elite level surfers, especially the ones that are coming up really young and going, all right, well, now that you've arrived, you're now having to battle the people whose posters you have on your wall, right? Or whose videos you've worn out in the VCR. I'm really dating myself here. But the point being is, like, you have to start to feel like you belong. And I think he always should have felt that way because of his talent and his performances. But I think he believes in it now, and he absolutely belongs. I look forward to seeing what he's capable of in the next few events, for sure.
Well, you go into Sunset Beach. He's won there before. He's a local boy, obviously, with the forecast being what it is right now. Seems very favorable for him. And just to reiterate what you said about him being dominant out there at one of the most, if not the most dangerous wave in the world, he's an alpha out there too. And understand that putting out your time at Pipeline, putting in your hours, that's something that few people have been able to do on the CT and be able to rise to the occasion like this. But beating John, who I think a lot of us consider one of the greatest surfers to ever do it and one of the best to ever do it at Pipe, beating him with the 10 in the final, pretty impressive. 16 points to 15.33 in the final, and the edge went to Baron Mamiya. And my third winner has to be the fans. I mean, dude, I was doing the broadcast in Spanish, and just being able to call that finals day was absolutely stunning. I know we had a couple ups and downs with, some off days and the 2 small days, especially for the women. But just overall, the first and final day that we ran were 2 amazing days. And I feel like it's truly revamping what the CT is all about. World's best surfers, world's best waves, and you want to be able to see people perform. And I felt like the judging was on point too. If you look at what Luli Pereira and the rest of the judging panel were able to do, they really accentuated the depth of these barrels and the degree of difficulty of a lot of them too. So from a fan's perspective, I felt like this event was on point, given that, we are going to be critical about the calls and whatnot. There were 2 really small days there in between, and we have to be honest, that's not what we want to see at Pipe. But luckily for us, we were able to finish in amazing conditions and with two of the best finals we've seen in a long time, Dave.
It's a good one, and it's a good start to the season for surf fans. And yeah, it's a little bit in line with my final winner too, which is, it's Jesse Miley Dyer, it's Travis Logie, it's Kayla Durden, and it's the Tours and Competitions office for really holding firm to get to that special last day. We mentioned it. It wasn't the easiest forecast that we were presented with for this event. And broadly, like the WSL designs its tours to go, we're trying to put ourselves in the best place to put the world's best surfers in the world's best waves, but the ocean's ultimately in charge. And this year we were presented with a pretty tricky forecast. We did have that bigger than forecast day on the Monday that we didn't end up running, and everyone and their mother had an opinion about it, myself included. But I will just add, because I thought, the journalist Ben Monty called this out on social media, which I thought was a good point. He goes, the Tours and Competitions office has never called an event off when the surfers wanted to run because it was, quote, too big. You know what I mean? And anyone saying otherwise is pretty silly. Like, I know for a fact, everyone sat around, they watched it all day on Monday, hoping that it would clean up, that it would get more organized, that it would be doable. And unfortunately, that didn't happen until it was way too late to start. You got Kelly Slater saying it's too dangerous and there was nowhere near enough opportunity out there to compete. You got Johns going up to Sunset Beach to surf instead, which is probably all the proof point you need. It just wasn't happening, and unfortunately, I do get it, right? We see a handful of amazing waves from the day, and we want to watch that happen, but it just wasn't the day for that. And they had to navigate that. They had to run in a couple of smaller days, which I don't think anyone wanted to see. But hats off to them for holding firm, because it got us to Saturday, quarters for the men, quarters for the women, final day, and it was just unquestionably a historic day in surfing, which was exciting.
Yeah. I fully agree. And I think the only person that, out of the members of Finals Day that wanted to run on that Monday was actually Barron. He said it in a post-heat interview. He was like, I wish we ran yesterday. But guess what? Still ended up winning. And that's a guy that can do it in those kind of conditions, and he can do it when it's a bit smaller too. And that's what you need to be able to do when you're a CT surfer, and especially if you want to be one of the very elite surfers to make it into the top 5 at the end of the year.
Great call. So great first stop on the CT, the Lexus Pipe Pro presented by Yeti. We've got the upcoming Hurley Sunset Beach Pro starting this week. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, we are coming back from break. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Mitchell Salazar, and it is now time for the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings update. Shaper Ranking! This is our second year running the Shaper Rankings, or as Britt Merritt calls it, the contest within the contest, as more than one person has come up and said it's the Shaping World title. Last year, we saw Matt Biolas and Lost Surfboards win CT Shaper of the Year for 2023. They are awarded at the Lexus WSL Awards at the Turtle Bay just before this year's CT season started. And there was a ton of movement last offseason as the world's best board builders got their programs built up for the start of the 2024 CT season. Just a reminder to our listeners, the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings ranks shapers based on points given to their team riders who finish in the quarterfinals or better. The ranking is a combined men's and women's ranking. The higher the surfer places, the more points that shaper receives. And we are going to be tracking the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings from CT1, which just concluded at Pipeline, through CT9, which will be in Fiji, and crown the 2024 CT Shaper of the Year before the WSL Finals in September. So, Mitch, what were your observations from the booth on the equipment that the world's best surfers were riding, and what do you think of the current top 5 on the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings after Pipe?
Well, pretty surprising that, Mayhem dropped down so much, especially given the success that he had at the beginning of the year in 2023. Big props to Channel Islands. I think they owe us a couple of boards now, Dave, because we really blew them up over at World Juniors. I mean, they had multiple people on Finals Day over there, and then here, at the Lexus Pipe Pro, obviously getting the win with Baron Mamiya, a new acquisition, by the way, which to me is a great signing. Imai Kalani DeVault makes the quarters too. Betty Lou Sakura Johnson, she was riding them for the majority of the event up until finals day. So Slater Designs, they get those points right there. But overall, I felt like DHD had a solid event too. Given that Connor O'Leary decided to go with Tokoro's for the last day and he made it into the semis, I thought that was huge for Wade Tokoro, but it wasn't as strong for Darren Hanley, and he was pumped. I mean, if you saw him on the broadcast, the guy is legit really, really pumped for this year. He wanted to be able to wear yellow at the end of the season last year, but I think the acquisition of, getting both Ethan Ewing, Jacob Wilcox on the team full-time too, and he even mentioned on the broadcast that Jacob Wilcox was actually working at his factory a good amount of time in between Challenger Series event just to be able to see what went on behind the scenes. I think that's huge for them. They got 5 men, 2 women on the team that really have good results here at Pipe. I feel like Sunset Beach is going to be a good event for them, and I feel like Mayhem, well, they have a lot to prove going into Sunset because with a good amount of surfers, especially with Crosby, Cole, and Cade being good surfers at Sunset Beach, I would expect them to do well. But, Chris Borst, once again, doing things with Caitlin Simmers. I mean, he moves up into 5 with just 1 surfer on the CT, Dave.
One's all it takes. I want to get into that, but I thought you said something interesting too, and you've spoken about this from your own competitive lens in the past as well. But, you talked about Connor O'Leary was on Tokoro's on that final day en route to his semifinal finish. He is a DHD team rider. Those could have been points going to Darren Hanley, but it seemed to be on the ground, those traveling shapers like your Britt Merricks or your Matt Biolases or your Darren Handleys, they were all just so stoked about not only the Vissla CT Shaper rankings, but just to see the world's best on their boards. But it didn't seem like there was any insecurity or animosity if their team riders decided to use a Tokoro or use an Arakawa or use a Pang because they're in Hawaii. Gabriel Medina, who's a Kabianca Surfboards team rider, he was on Tokoro's. Jack Robinson, who's a Sharp Eye team rider, he was on Arakawa's. We talked about Connor being a DHD team rider riding Tokoro's. Leonardo Fioravanti had a bunch of different shapers. Betty Lou had a bunch of different shapers. So it was cool to see kind of the communal vibe about, even though maybe they weren't getting these points in the rankings, they still were appreciative that these long-standing Hawaiian shapers who have built boards for the best surfers every time they come to Hawaii for decades at this point were getting their flowers as well. But can you talk to us a little bit about that, Mitch? Because you obviously have traveled to Hawaii, you've competed in Hawaii. What is it about the Hawaiian shapers that gives the surfers such confidence in those kinds of waves?
Well, first things first, as a surfer and as a competitor, I'm riding what feels good to me. So in the end, I feel like that's what Betty Lou had in mind when she was in finals day. She was riding something that just felt comfortable and natural to her. On the side of the Hawaiian shapers, Glenn Pang said it best during his little intro with the Vissla CT Shaper rankings on the broadcast. We know these waves better, we know the locations better, and we want to be able to give these traveling surfers the boards that a lot of these local surfers would be riding in these given conditions. So overall, you have Wade Tokoro, who's an incredible surfer, John Pizell, amazing surfer, Glenn Pang also could easily be, in the 50, 60 plus range of great competitors worldwide. And Eric Arakawa, Jack Robinson mentioned that he's, basically his uncle. Yeah. So having a relationship like that that's super intimate for somebody that makes and designs boards at the world's most highest quality level possible, I think is super important for somebody who's looking to make it back into the top 5 and can compete for a world championship. I think they deserve a lot of praise and credit, but more importantly, it goes to show you that you're always going to go with a board that is very accurate to the location. We saw with Mick a lot of times when he used to come to lower trestles too, he used to order Mayhems, and Darren Hanley had nothing to say about it. He was like, dude, I'm going to support you fully in your decision because in the end, if you're winning the world championship and my name's attached to your name, that's perfectly fine with me. So I think in the end, it's just going to come down to those people that are willing to let go of their ego and allow their surfers to surf certain boards at certain locations. And then in the end, Marcio said it on the broadcast in his little piece, I have a couple world championships. I have multiple event wins. So whether or not I win the Vissla CT Shaper rankings is kind of irrelevant to me. I feel in the end, most of these guys are just too competitive to let that go. But as a surfer, you got to go with what feels best for you, Dave.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought up Marcio and Sharp. I have a feeling he'd like to be the CT Shaper of the Year, and he, I mean, he could very well do it this year. We mentioned it in the prior segment, but it bears repeating. Like, Sharp Eye have built such an impressive program over the last few years, and they were so dominant on the men's championship tour in 2023. They had bad luck on the women's side last year. They had Joanne Defay, who went out with an injury early on, and uncharacteristic performances from Tatiana Weston Webb last year. She was performing certainly under her average in 2023. But they had the complete inversion at Pipe, right? They had no men's team riders who made it to the quarterfinals or better, but they had 3 women's team riders put points on the board for them. Joanne Defay, who's back from injury and looks as solid as ever. Luana Silva, who's young but getting her second crack at the CT as a replacement surfer. And then Tatiana Weston Webb feels like she's found a return to form.
Yep.
Your opinion on Sharp Eye moving forward, because I think that it will be more of an anomaly that their men's team doesn't put up any results in the Shaper rankings. And if their women's team's able to flesh that out, they could be very, very dangerous in a very short amount of time.
True. And I mean, that's what we talked about all last year, Dave. It's that their women's team didn't perform the way they needed to, and that's why Mayhem was so successful. Carissa, Caroline, obviously, their top 2 riders on the women's side for loss, but look at the rankings on the women's side just after Pipe. They win. Sharp Eye wins that event. Yeah. So 14,235 on the season. Event finish, number 1 with 10,000 points. And I think most importantly, the confidence that it's going to give a lot of these young women moving forward too, because Luana Silva, she's a local at Sunset Beach. She surfs great there. I mean, if you look at her free surfing clips, she's just outstanding. I feel like Tati could easily have a bounce back event, especially on the backhand right there. And the one wild card is Joanne Defay, because given that she's had a lot of time off to be able to recover fully from injury and has something to prove too, because she was a world title contender for 2 years in a row, I feel like this should be a good event for her too. But I also want to mention the additions of Samuel and Miguel Pupo to the JS team. Finally, Jason Stevenson opens up a major market in Brazil. I don't know what took him so long, Dave, but that's a market that he hadn't touched. And given that he was so successful in the late 2000s, early to mid 2010s, he now has multiple riders on the CT. He has, Miguel and Sam, but most importantly, Ryan Callanan, who's been his stable guy on the championship tour for many years. So big props to them. They still need a bigger women's crew, but overall, that's a big change.
Yeah, and Frederico Moraes is back for JS as well. Yep. So it's interesting to see him get in the mix. No results for them at Pipe, but early days in the season. I think it's totally worth it for us to round off the Vissla CT Shaper ranking segment by talking about the current front runners. You talked about them already, but it should be emphasized, like a really impressive rebuild in the last couple of years from Channel Islands. It's a brand that arguably still has the most world titles on its surfboards over the last several decades, but it's also one that lead shaper Britt Merrick and team manager Brent Powers have been pretty candid about. They've been rebuilding their roster in the last few years after a dominant few decades. And they had a great opening event. You mentioned it. The off-season acquisition of Baron Mamiya, he delivers a win at Pipe. You've got returning from the Challenger Series surfer, Imai Kalani Duval, nabs a quarterfinals result. And that delivered them the best outing in the opening event for the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. It could have been even stronger. You mentioned it before. Betty Luce Johnson was riding CIs in the opening days of the event, moved up to her step up with Slater Designs for the final day, so they get those points. But they could be a real danger team to watch as well. And I'm sure, like all these programs, they're looking at not only shoring up the talent they currently have on the team and securing them, making sure they've got the right equipment for the right waves, but also looking at some of these other surfers that are out there, because there is some fluidity on tour on both the men's and women's side in terms of what the world's best surfers are riding.
Oh, and just another thing to add for JS, Ramsey Bukiam's also on that team.
Oh, great point. Great point.
Yeah. So they have a couple people that they added on. But you know what's so surprising about Channel Islands, Dave? I mean, they have, out of all the shapers worldwide and all of the brands, they probably went downhill the most during a span of 3 or 4 years. They were kind of irrelevant, almost like Brock Purdy, who made the Super Bowl for the San Francisco 49ers. It felt like that. And all of a sudden, they're back on the scene. They're always being in the conversation of the best shaper and the best boards. And I feel like they probably have the most overall board around this Happy Every Day, which I feel is a perfect board for somebody that's just looking to have fun in any kind of conditions. But they don't have a massive team. And I kind of just noticed that Lakey Peterson, she loses out early, no points on the women's side. And you look at the rest of the crew, you're just like, wow, like overall, it comes down to them just doing well in finals there. So as long as they're making it to the semis or the finals, they're going to have a good shot at it. But it's not like they have a massive team. Still a big amount of props to Sharp Eye, which I feel are going to have a great year. But you can't count out those people that have 4 or 5 people overall. And it comes down to doing well on the women's side just because there's a smaller draw. So if you're able to get those people in quarters or better, you're going to have a good chance of being world number 1 at the end of the season.
It's a great point. Well, we are going to take one more quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we will finish up the podcast when we come back. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the lineup. I'm your co-host, Mitchell Salazar, and that is Dave Prodan, CSO of the World Surf League. Dave, let's get into our fan questions. And as always, if we don't get to your question today, we'll be doing our best to get it later on. And we do respond in our DM, so text us at the lineup pod. Our first question from Darrell77, Dave. What are your thoughts on so many big name competitors taking a break from competition?
It's a good question. I think it's probably been the question that's been on everyone's mind over the last couple of weeks. We talked about it a little bit in this podcast with, Carissa stepping away from full-time competition, Steph taking a 1-year hiatus to come back in 2025, and now Felipe Toledo doing the same. I don't think there's kind of one common theme for why any athlete at any level decides to take a step back or decides to retire. I think it's case by case, and everyone's got their own kind of unique circumstances. I do think the conversation's interesting because, as we talked about, we've had, the greatest surfer of all time, Kelly Slater, has been on tour for around 35 years. And I think the surfing industrial complex, everyone gets a drink. I'll get it in there once an episode. It's a community obsessed with the cult of youth. And Kelly was kind of the next best thing for 3 decades, right? So he like a real anomaly, like a real outlier and so many, forgive the pun, but like so many waves of would-be superstars, of would-be world champions just crashed up against the bow of the SS Slater for so long, and I think that really shifted everyone's understanding of what like an elite level competitor should do with their life. And he is amazing. Like he is an alien, he is an anomaly, etc. But I think if you are a world title contender or you're a multi-world title holder, if we're able to have you on tour amongst the world's best for a decade plus, like it is a huge win. And as we talked about, it is hugely taxing. It requires so much focus. And for decades, every world champ said the same, right? Whether it was Lisa Anderson or Lane Beachley or Andy Irons or Mick Fanning, they've all said you have to be so singularly focused and so selfish to win a world title. And it's a double-edged sword, right? You have to have that singular focus to compete and to be peaking at that level for as long as you need to win. But then that comes with quite a lot of sacrifice. And so I do think that the toll, as you pointed out, physical and mental, that it takes on surfers after a while is a lot. And for some of them, maybe they accomplish everything they need to in that window of time. And like Carissa are happy to say, thank you, appreciate it. I'm now stepping away from full-time competition to pursue other interests, both personally and professionally. And then you might get surfers like Steph or Felipe, Aki in the past, Andy in the past, Kelly in the past, who say, I need a break. I need a year to fully recover, to re-energize so I can come back because I've got more in the tank. I just need that break. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it happening. And I think that, whether you look at Katie or Molly or Betty Lou or Barron or any number of these generational talents coming through, the sport is the sport is the sport, and it's there to be a platform for the world's best surfing, and you're going to consistently have generations filtering through, and it's hard when you have to say goodbye to like really popular elite level talent, but that's just the course of sport in any sport. But I don't know, Mitch, what do you think about that?
Oh, I think you're on point. And as any athlete knows, you're just always looking for that same kind of euphoria that you find when you win. And I think Steph has accomplished as much as she probably will. 8 world championships. I mean, how many CT events has she won?
So many, yeah.
Close to Kelly,
Right.
who has, in the 50s. What Carissa has done over the time period that she's been on tour, and she said that she's not fully closing the door on it. It doesn't seem like anything is in the near future, but I wouldn't say that she wouldn't come back for a few events or two, given the right waves. But I think the motivation might not be the same either. And I think for somebody like Kelly, he just finds motivation in wanting to compete and succeed and beat other people. That might not be the case for both Steph and Carissa. So I understand why they want to take a little step back. Steph has the option to come back in 2025. You have time. Think about it if you want. Go and free surf. And if it's not as entertaining as you thought it was going to be without putting a jersey on, then you can always come back. Now, for Felipe, this is obviously something that's concerning both his mental and physical health, and he feels like it's time. The one surprising thing about Felipe's timing on it, though, was that it almost felt like he needed to surf at Pipe just to be able to see how it would feel. And then afterwards, he's like, you know what, dude, like, I kind of got a taste of it. I need to take a step back. So that's the one thing that I will say about Felipe's time away. I do think that he's still one of the best surfers in the world, though. So you get him on the right wave, and the guy's going to win most of his heats that he's surfing. But overall, everybody's different, and only they truly understand what they're going through. So good for them. Hopefully, we are able to see them later on the CT. But for right now, we got to enjoy what we got, because we got a lot of great youth on the championship tour, especially Caitlin Simmers and Molly Picklum on the women's side. And getting into our second question, Dave, from @Bredimus Maximus. Are there any women's events in the past that come close to Katie, Molly, and Betty Lou Sakura Johnson at Pipe?
Oh, yeah, no, that's a good question, and I want to try to avoid recency bias because we're a couple days removed from it. I think the honest answer is there's not. I don't think there's ever been a women's final day or a women's event that's come close to what we saw on Saturday. Like, it blew me away, and Katie and Molly and Betty Lou, like, in those conditions with that pressure on the world stage, I've never seen anything like it. For sure, there's been amazing, women's finals, like, even looking at kind of the pressure of the finals at lowers the last couple of years and seeing performances from, Steph or Carissa has been impressive. Fiji back in the day, Sally Fitz, bursting her eardrum and winning the event. Lakey Peterson at J-Bay. Like, there are amazing women's events and amazing women's finals. I just think, like, we've turned the page in this sport as of Saturday, and there's no going back. Like, I just think that final day is in a class of its own. But I don't know, Mitch, you might have a different take on that.
I just had to look things up, because the only event that I can think of that might have been as high scoring as the one we saw on Saturday was the event that we saw in Mex a few years ago.
Sure.
And given it's a fully different wave. I mean, I'm not comparing Pipeline to Barra or anything like that, but the talent that I saw in 2021 at the Corona Open Mexico was, to me, some of the highest we've ever seen, especially on finals day. Courtney and Malia were searching for the last spot to requalify. Malia needed to win the event. Courtney loses out, and Malia's still going. She makes the final, but eventually loses to the queen of point breaks, Stephanie Gilmore.
Right.
But how close was it? I mean, 15.83 to 15.27. Those are high heat totals, especially if you're surfing 3 times in a single day. Carissa posts 17.74 in the quarters. Malia was on a tear, and Steph just slowly but surely was making her way through. Sally Fitzgibbons also makes it into the semifinals there with 15-point-plus heat totals. So I think at Pipeline, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we've never seen a performance like that by any of those female surfers that we saw on finals day there, especially given that a lot of them were looking backdoor too. Most of the time, I always felt that a lot of them were always looking pipe. And to be completely fair, Dave, as a goofy footer, including both you and I, and anybody that's ever surfed pipe before, backdoor is a much scarier wave than pipeline at that size. You're not throwing yourself under the ledge on that thing, you know? Like, for you to be able to go, like, they had a lot of guts to be able to pull that off. So props to them. I mean, at pipe, I couldn't say no, but I think overall it's definitely top 5 all time for women surfing. So good question right there, Bredimus Maximus. And our third question from at Noah Purington. Which of the two are the women as a whole accelerating faster in? Airs or barrels?
Yeah, that's another pretty good question. And it's
Close, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting too, I guess, because you kind of want to factor in both what happens inside and outside of competition. Because if you look at the calendar on the CT, right, especially pre-relegation, it's Pipe, Sunset Beach, Super Tubos and Peniche, Bells Beach and Margaret River, and it's the same for the men. Like those aren't exactly like aerial based waves, right? So we're not seeing a ton of it in competition really on either side unless the conditions warrant it. And again, I was trying to avoid the recency bias. I just feel like even before Saturday, the things that we were seeing from Molly and Katie and Betty and Carissa and even Tyler and Coco previously in tube riding, Caroline Marks, Tatiana West and Webb, of course, a number of surfers on tour. I think they are accelerating faster in barrels at the moment. But mostly I just think that's a function of the waves that they're competing in, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you look at someone like a Sierra Kerr who's coming up, or an Erin Brooks, or a number, Sky Brown, a number of these young women who are coming up through the system, they're crazy aerialists. So it'll be like, I guess it's a non-answer. I don't really have it, but if I, if life was on the line, I'd probably say barrels, I guess, just based on what I've seen recently. But I just think they're accelerating across the board in so many ways. And I do think that's part of that generational shift we've been talking about on tour too. I think, the platform for the world's best surfing on the championship tour, especially the women's tour of the last decade, there's been event parity and then, pay parity and then pay equality. And I really do think it's had a part in developing this upcoming generation of women's talent that are coming through the ranks. I think they've seen what needs to be done. I think they've been motivated by the platform that exists before them. And I think they're developing into unbelievable surfers by the time they get to the CT. But what about you, Mitch? What do you think? Like, airs or barrels for women's development?
Well, I agree with you in the sense that most of the waves that you're going to find are going to have more of a barrel section than an air section. An air section's hard to find, and especially to be able to time everything and stuff like that. What we're seeing on the CT is the addition of 2 venues that hadn't been on the opportunity list for a lot of these women either. So you go to Pipe, you go to Tahiti, and now you have to surf barrels. And I think that's why they're accelerating quicker, and a lot of these young women coming up through both the QS and the junior systems are looking up to them so much, is because eventually if they want to make it to the CT, they're going to have to go through those venues. So I'd say barrels too. But I think in the air sense, I mean, we've seen Silvana Lima since, 25 years ago, start pulling those off and do them on a consistent basis. I mean, she dropped 9.33 last year at the U.S. Open, close to 40 years old, So for her to still be able to do that, Sierra Kerr coming up, Erin Brooks is obviously, the one person that you want to watch out for. Sky Brown, I think, is great. Bella Kenworthy.
Right.
And Caitlin Simmers and Molly Picklum on the CT are 2 of the people that I would think are doing them more and more, especially in a jersey. Carissa had the one crazy one at Newcastle a few years ago that was close to a 10. But I still think the barrels, because most of the venues that we have these events at kind of force them to surf that way. You're getting scored higher within the barrel. There are few air sections, and for the most part, you're not going to risk getting a good score for wanting to go for an air. So I think that overall, you're promoting more of a barrel kind of reading wave. But in the end, to be the best surfer in the world, you have to be the most complete one. So I think that airs are going to come into value a lot more over the next few months that we're probably going to see here on the CT, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, they're both good options, right? I think like the whole goal is like we want to have a platform for the world's best surfing, and whether that's in the tube or on the face or in the air, like if everyone's developing and pushing what people thought was previously possible, then we're in a good spot. So, but appreciate everyone writing in at the lineup pod. As Mitch said, if we didn't get to your question on the podcast, we will do our best to answer in the DM. So keep those questions and comments coming. Mitch, this was a ton of fun. Before I go, we've got the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach. We are recording during the opening day of the window. It's a lay day today. But any predictions for this event over the next week and a half?
Well, it should be huge a couple of days. I think those are going to be lay days. There's a chance that we do run Peahi too. The winds have changed. They're a bit more variable now. I feel like we're going to see some big stuff by a lot of people that have something to prove here. Want to see Gabe do well, especially a goofy footer on the backhand here at Sunset Beach. It's hard. We're going to have a different champion this year because Felipe's out of the event on the men's side. So Griffin Colapinto, he made the final last year. I feel like those San Clemente kids are going to do well. Cole, Cade, and especially Crosby with the connection that he has with this wave. Don't count out Jacob Wilcox. On the women's side, I feel like this should be a good event for Gabriella Bryan. I think Luana Silva, being a local surfer, should have a good chance. And of course, one of my personal favorites and somebody who finished runner-up at the last event that we had, Molly Picklum, looking to defend her title here at Sunset Beach. She's one to look out for, Dave.
Man, you're ready with that take. I'm impressed. I couldn't think of anything. But Mitch, it's always fun talking to you, man. We'll keep it up, obviously, on our WhatsApp thread through the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach. And thanks to all the listeners for the support, as always. And Mitch, you and I will talk very soon, I'm sure.